El refo was a Gringo. He come from El Guerrero. Gringo. Gringo. El refo was a Gringo. He come from Inglaterra. Gringo. Gringo.
Unless you want to be there for the intro. Hello from me. Hello from here.
Come down the stairs.
Good afternoon, everybody. What's more surprising, a 3 o'clock kickoff? Our first 3 o'clock kickoff since December. Amazing. There we were, our outer galaxy on our little rock, millions of miles from anywhere, and I didn't think that the evil empire could find us, but the Rupert Murdoch Death Stars found us now, isn't it? So 12:30 kickoffs from now till doomsday. The other surprising factor is we've got Pete with us today. The last 2 times Pete Watson has spoken to us, we've had a frozen pitch and a deluge. So well done, Pete. It looks like the weather is on our side.
I'm doing.
However,
I've got an earthquake planned later on.
should the skies suddenly go black and comets and the aliens from Independence Day appear, don't be too surprised. Anyway, it's wonderful to welcome back Pete Watson from the University of Leeds, and of course Alex, who was with us very recently from the National Football Museum, and they're collaborating to talk about the favourite subject apparently of the Record Cafe, which appears to be South American football and various cues and what have you. So we're looking forward to this one, so give a warm welcome to Alex and Pete.
Hello, so I'm just going to get used to using this again. So can everyone hear me all right? Fantastic. So yes, thank you very much for having us both across. This is a little chat about a project that me and Pete have been working on for, how long has it been?
2 years now?
About
more or less,
2.
on and off.
Blimey, 2 years. So, and there's still plenty more for us to find out with this. So we're just sharing a little bit of the research that we've come across so far. Just to briefly introduce our topic, these are some of the guys. These are some of the guys we're talking about. In the middle, roughly, let's see, just here is a gentleman called Richard Maddison, and he was a British referee who went to Argentina and also Peru in the 1940s and 50s. And we came across at the museum his story because about 12 years ago, his daughter donated a whole collection of material that he kept, scrapbooks, photographs, programmes, newspaper clippings. And it was this amazing insight to this relatively untold story of British refs being hired to work in domestic leagues and also international tournaments in South America. And then in more recent times, we've also received some other more material on loan which we've digitised. So this is Pat Jeffrey, who's the granddaughter of another British referee, Charles Wood, who went in the same years as Richard Maddison to Argentina. And so you might be able to just about see her with the photograph album, the original suitcase, very small as it was in these days, none of your gigantic packs and bags. You had to get everything into something, a suitcase probably about that wide by about that high. And so she very kindly allowed us to digitise this material and add it. And so me and Pete have been then using that as the basis for a project working with colleagues in South America and digitised newspapers to find out more about these guys. And so to provide a bit of context, they're going out into South America because British referees are seen as some of the best in the world. Football has a long history in South America going back to the 1860s, but it only became professional in the 1930s. And so at that time, as it started to develop, it had, as Pete described to me earlier on, some teething problems involving assaults on referees having to hide in changing rooms, running away from angry crowds, angry directors as well. And so it became a very sort of inhospitable environment for for domestic referees in Argentina, in Brazil and other countries to try and ply their trade. They weren't very well respected. In contrast, British referees were respected around the world, and in the early 1950s, they have a very prominent place in international football. During the interwar period, the home nations were outside of FIFA because they didn't want to be, basically fell out with FIFA over regulations about the definition of amateurism. Excuse me. And so that's part of the reason why England wasn't England and the other home nations weren't part of the FIFA when the first World Cups were held, including obviously in 1930 in Uruguay. So the home nations rejoined FIFA after the Second World War, and then British referees feature very prominently in the World Cups across that period. And that's partly because Stanley Rouse, who's the secretary of the FA, has a very good relationship with FIFA and arranges for like referees training courses and for British referees to be hired around the world. So if you're in different countries and you wanted someone to advise you on how to improve your refereeing, you get in touch with Stanley at the FA and then he'd suggest someone coming out. So British refs controlled a lot of the games at the 1950 World Cup. They controlled 10 out of the 22 games. So that's in quite an amazing proportion just by British referees and essentially English and Scottish referees, and I think one Welshman. And then it's 10 out of 26 at the 54 World Cup, and then it kind of drops in the period after that. Excuse me. But they also crucially referee the very big important games. So in 1950, it's the final game between Uruguay and Brazil, which famously sees Uruguay beat Brazil to win the World Cup. That's refereed by an Englishman, George Reader. Arthur Ellis referees the 1952 Olympic football final, and in 1954, Welshman Mervyn Griffiths referees the final of the 1954 World Cup between Hungary and West Germany. And it's still apparently slightly unpopular in Hungary because he disallowed an equalising goal that would have made it 3-3 instead of 3-2 to Germany. So across the 40s and 50s, British refs go not just to Argentina, but they go across to quite a wide range of different countries across the continent, including Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Paraguay. The numbers are quite large in Argentina, about 33, and then about 18 refs go to Brazil across this period. And then after that, it's smaller numbers of refs who go to other countries. So that's a little bit of the intro, and then what I'm going to do is just talk through a couple of the refs who went out to Argentina, and then Pete's going to chat through some of the refs who went across to Chile. So one of the very first referees to go out to South America is a guy called Isaac Caswell, who's from Blackburn, and he goes out after he's eventually retired from refereeing in Britain. And this is quite a common pattern where British refs get to go because they're seen as quite experienced, but also they've had to stop refereeing in England because they've reached the age limit. He worked as a commercial traveller, and then also he was a Labour councillor. And so interestingly enough, one time whilst he's out in South America, he has to write back to basically say, I'm going to have to withdraw from being a councillor because I'm going to probably find it hard to get to meetings. He's got plenty of experience. He's been refereed international games. He's refereed cup finals in the Republic of Ireland, or the Irish Free State as it was. And so he's a very experienced guy, and he's the first person brought out in the 30s, 1937. Excuse me. Sorry. 1937 to Argentina. And so he starts to not only just educate referees on sort of the latest British methods of refereeing, but also, crucially, goes out there and referees games. And so apparently he makes that breakthrough where previously referees were easily intimidated, they were attacked or put under pressure by directors. And so in one of his early games, it makes a big key point of obviously sending someone off and not being intimidated, not backing down. And then after that, that apparently leads to a sort of increase in respect for referees for his refereeing. And so he's sort of a very interesting precursor to what comes afterwards. But he has to stop because obviously we get up to the early 1939 and then the Second World War comes along. So he spends 3 seasons, and on his final one, his return home is delayed somewhat because there's a German battleship, or pocket battleship as it was called, the Graf Spee, which was out in the South Atlantic at this time at the start of the war. And so he's waiting to sail back from, now Pete might be able to help me out with the pronunciation,
Montevideo.
In fact, actually...
Montevideo.
No, thanks. And so the Grass Bay, which was essentially been run down by a squadron of British light cruisers, and so after a battle in which the larger German ship had been forced to seek refuge in neutral Montevideo, it had a base 48 hours extended to 72 hours, and then it sailed out, and then it blew itself up because it had been given instructions not to be captured, and the captain decided he wasn't going to fight a futile battle, so they actually evacuated most of the crew, who then got interned. So Isaac writes about this and talks to crowds back at home when he comes about obviously having seen this sort of quite spectacular incident during the Second World War. So in the late 1940s, this begins to pick up speed again. And what you have is larger groups of British referees going out. So in 1948, 10 go to Argentina and 4 go to Brazil. Amongst the ones going to Brazil is one particularly prominent referee, Jack Barrick, who you can see here in the middle of the 1948 FA Cup final. And so he reached this sort of blue ribboned event in his career. He'd risen up from being working in a boot factory outside of Northampton. Fantastic, excellent. It's really good to know that there's the local connections in the room. And so he had, again, a very experienced referee. He's refereed international games. He got up to this one. This was a 4-2 victory for Manchester United over Blackpool, I think, if I got the right way around. Yes, because this was the first of 2 failed attempts by Stanley Matthews to win the FA Cup final. Obviously successful the 3rd time in 1953. So Jack was obviously flying high in 1948. He got to the pinnacle of his career, and then for him it then kind of came crashing down because he was then reached the age limit for the Football League. They changed the regulation slightly, and so he found himself having refereed the FA Cup final, and then a couple of months later being told you're basically too old, so you can't referee us anymore. Fortunately, at that point, the Sao Paulo FA had come in with an offer to go out to Brazil. Excuse me. And so he went out there for several trips, and these are some of the wonderful pennants that he collected during his time there. I'm not sure if you'll be perhaps able to see, but I was looking closely, and actually one of the pennants actually has his name on. So it's not just a pennant for a game, it's a pennant that seems to be given to him specifically to commemorate him taking part in that game. He went out several times and then came back, and then when he came back the first time, he actually had to decide to give up his job because they kept it open from him when he went there, and then when he came back, the boss was away, and they basically said, we can't make this decision, you either got to stay and keep your job, or you can pack it in if you want to go back. And so he said, I've been talking to people, like they said, it's better for British prestige if I go back out there, so this is what I'm going to do. And so when he went back the second time, it was the 1949 South American Championship, it was called then, now called the Copa America. And so, if you can imagine it, this is a slightly different tournament format in that period. The South American Championship was one big group, so everyone played each other once in a table format. So rather than having smaller groups and then a knockout, it's a longer tournament that takes place over roughly about 4 weeks. Yeah. And so Jack was held in such high esteem that he refereed nearly a third of the tournament's games. So he was refereeing an international game basically every 3 or 4 days, which is quite an achievement, and I don't think it's ever been, we haven't done the research on it, but I don't think anyone else has quite done that level of refereeing in a single tournament. So Jack was out there for several years and then came back. Like a lot of the referees, it's hard to find out what they did too much afterwards. Interesting enough, he came back, he was shortly a football manager, and then after that, he then stock car racing refereeing was something that he did. So he travelled around England for that, which is a quite interesting different career path. So just how we doing on the time? Excellent, cool. So moving across now to Argentina, this is Richard Madison, the gentleman who we started with, whose collection came to the museum. This is him in the National Stadium of Uruguay, Centenario. I really should have Pete pre-recorded so I can just press the button for him to pronounce these countries properly, because I'm not to scratch like he is. You'll be getting a much better pronunciation of South American terms and names shortly. And so Richard was a former coal miner and soldier. He'd been in the army for about nearly 20 odd years before the start of the Second World War. He's from County Durham, which is a region very close to my heart. And he's interesting as well because he was married without adult children. Some of the refs, who we'll see a little bit later, went out and actually took their children with them to form a small community out in Argentina of refs and part of the wider British community. He's a Football League linesman, so this was an opportunity for some referees to go out and ref at a level higher than they could get to in Britain. So it wasn't necessarily because they weren't as good as other refs, it's always about the challenge of opportunities, of spaces opening up. And as in refereeing with as any other part of football, there's always politics to a degree of who is successful, who rises to the top, who gets the chance to be promoted to the football, to different positions. And so this is one of my favourite photographs in the collection. Richard is, believe it or not, somewhere in that mass of players, officials, policemen, and anyone else who decided to traipse onto the pitch at that exact moment. And this is from a big game between Racing Club, who were one of the biggest successful clubs in Argentina at that time, and the club that obviously are very famous these days, Boca Juniors. This is in one of the newly built stadiums at the time. So during the 40s and 50s in Argentina, they had quite a growth in building very large mega stadiums. And part of this was through money put into that kind of development under President Juan Perón, who was also, I think I got this right saying, Pete, a big racing fan?
Yes.
Yes.
Much more into military sports.
There we go. But very keen on using football for political purposes or for political support. And in fact, the stadium was named at the time the Juan Perón Stadium. It still has that name to a degree, I think, to this day.
I don't know,
actually. So that's a great example of the kind of material, really interesting kind of stories that are starting to come out through the scrapbook. And what's even better about this one is there's a very small caption at the bottom that says, "I'm in the net." There's a follow-up one on the next page, which is a close-up, and it says, "I'm still in the net." And this one on the right-hand side also has a caption where you can see closer up with the players sort of milling around him. And the bottom, in echoes of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, he says, "It seems I'm vexed." But also what this album also does is it reveals some of the benefits and joys of being a referee going out to South America at this time. So this is at the time, obviously, back in Britain, of austerity. There was a Gallup poll in about 1948-49 that found that about a third of the country, if they could, were happy to emigrate because they just wanted to get away from post-war rationing, coal shortages, fuel shortages, housing shortages, you name it. Obviously, we were just short of it. And rationing survived until about 1953, I believe, which in this context, on the right-hand side, I appreciate it's quite small, that is a typical Argentinian asado, which is obviously it's a very meat-heavy barbecue, to say the least, a very popular part of Argentinian culture. And sort of in Britain, you're probably looking about the equivalent of like a month's worth of meat rationing being thrown onto one single barbecue. So you can imagine in the 40s and 50s, referees going out with their families, it's like, I would always imagine it's like going from black and white to technicolor when you go to South America, which obviously hasn't suffered from the same ravages of war, rationing. And it's also this amazing chance to, as you can see on the left-hand side, you go and see the sites, you've got the opportunities to travel, see different places. Again, as Britons, you would very rarely get this chance to go to South America if you're working class, essentially outside if you've gone there to work there, which obviously quite a number of Brits did. And Richard also got to, like Jack, referee at the Copa America. So the one that he got to go to was in Peru in 1953. So we see him here between Peru, obviously the shirt that I'm wearing, and Brazil. This is one of the more harmonious games that he controlled during this tournament. During another one with Paraguay, he was the game had to be abandoned. Well, actually, no, let's get this right. I'm trying to remember. The result was, I think, slightly annulled, partly because the Paraguayans put on a fourth substitute instead of their third one. Substitutes being still relatively new at this time. The reason why people may have not noticed at the time, because Madison also been assaulted by a Paraguayan player. The dispute is between whether he was kicked or punched, which does seem like sort of splitting hairs slightly. But that was was one of two games. There was another one where he had to suspend another game involving Bolivia after 66 minutes due to unsporting conduct of the teams. Also, unfortunately, Richard tended to come with a lot of sort of abuse from or critical comments from some members, some sections of the press for his performance in some of these games. So David was one of our other referees where we started being able to dig into the material that we've received from the family. He's again a very interesting one because he never actually even made it onto the Football League list. So he's an example of referees who are much lower down in the pyramid who got the chance to go to South America. We don't actually yet know too much about the process of which referees, how they decide which ones could go out, because some of the refs had huge amounts of experience, others had less. His album's also great as well because it includes a lot of material like sort of postcards. These two are particularly nice because these were produced in Argentina and sort of about referees in general, but might have been produced in the context of British refs coming out. And so one on the left hand says the lighter side, which shows the ref turning up to fanfare, flowers, celebrations, the red carpet being literally rolled out, and then on the other side, which was not too far off how they were having to react in some circumstances, fleeing from angry players, fans and spectators all behind, and even right down at the bottom, a very angry football. But again, it provides real insights into really hidden aspects of it all. So this shows the British families, referees and their families coming out to meet some recent arrivals who are coming out to join their smaller community. And right down at the bottom, we can see some of the small children who tend to be about 12 or under in terms of their ages. And so again, these provide really lovely insights into this sort of like wider life that they're experiencing out there. And I now shall pass over.
Thank you. As the clouds gather across the horizon, I'm going to talk about Chile, and what we're going to do here is show you various slides, firstly about the referees, but then some of the newspaper reports that we've picked out from two main sources, the Estadio sporting newspaper and La Nación, which is more of a daily newspaper. So William Crawford is the first of the main three. There are four that are there fairly permanently, but there are three that are there for a longer time. William Crawford is Scottish, or in the words of the Chilean newspapers, English, which still rankles. We don't quite know what his refereeing experience was. That's something that's kind of yet to look at in terms of what league games he was involved with in Scotland. But he is probably seen as being the best of the referees that goes to Chile. He has the best reputation. He has a bit of a kind of, there's quite a few lovely newspaper reports of him in some of the Scottish daily newspapers after he's back talking about some of his experiences. He is also the easiest to caricature, which again we're going to show you a few of the cartoons that are drawn about some of these referees as well. So that's William Crawford. Charles McKenna is possibly the most controversial. He has a reputation not only in Chile but also in Peru and then Costa Rica. He is one of the referees that will travel around different continents, and there is even a match called the Maquenazo in Costa Rica, which he disrupted, let's put it lightly, but we'll focus on that a little bit later. What makes him particularly interesting is that he was a boxer, so he was in the Royal Navy during the First World War and claimed to have won over 100 fights as a bantamweight. Sadly, this didn't help him in, I think, the 1953 South American Championships, when he was also there, when he actually got knocked out by Jalma Santos, the very well-known kind of Brazilian defender, one of those all-time Brazilian defenders. There's a lovely photo of him being dragged off the pitch, pretty much semi-comatose. So obviously he didn't have the best chin, probably in his late 40s by this point. That, you know, we're talking about fairly aged referees. And the third of the main ones is Walter Manning. It seems that he really didn't have any Football League record at all. As Alex was saying, we're not talking about some of the best referees in Britain that are going across to South America to referee. Certainly some of them had that kind of level of the game, but often they hadn't. And this was something that a lot of the Chileans, Argentinians and so on didn't actually know. They assumed they were getting some of the best referees and assumed they were at the top level. They weren't always. Walter Manning is from Burton. There are lots of articles that Alex has dug out about his returns to Burton after his being in Chile. He kind of comes and goes a little bit. He spends some time in Chile as their kind of FIFA refereeing representative. Walter Manning will also be working in one of the schools. One of the other interesting things we've been able to dig out a little bit of information about is what types of life they were living. Because obviously they're not just refereeing, you know, every day, although quite often they'd be refereeing at least 2 games in every round. Certainly the ones in Argentina would be doing 1 game in the kind of second tier, and then they'd be doing a game in the first tier as well on the Saturdays and Sundays. So they are quite busy. But Walter Manning was coaching and teaching in the Grange School, whereas actually somewhere that I was on my year abroad in Chile back 30 odd years ago. There's a lovely photo of him actually umpiring cricket. So we've got a little bit of an idea of what kind of things they were doing. One of the other diary entries, I think is it Madison, is carving wooden toys. Was it Madison or was it Wood that was doing that? Was it Wood? Probably Wood. It's got to be Wood, isn't it? You know, kind of nominative determinism, isn't it? But again, we have these kind of stories of some of the referees going to cafes, which are still in Buenos Aires. He was at, well, I think it was Wood, is carving little toys to try and sell as extra money at the time. So we have these lovely little insights of the kind of things that they're up to. And they're often a centre of attention. The first kind of few months that they're in Chile, Argentina, there is a lot of newspaper coverage of what they're doing, of interviews, of reports into them. There is one other referee who comes out for a year, David Gregory, who is from Wales and again therefore is English. Again, South America haven't quite worked out the intricacies of the British Isles. So we found these details about how much they're earning at the time. So when they go out, they're earning 25,000 pesos a month, which isn't as much as it sounds. The interesting comparison, though, is how much they're earning compared to the Chilean referees. So they're only earning 2,000 pesos a month. So it's a huge expenditure by the Chilean, what's called the División de Honor, the Chilean kind of Premier League, if you like. Again, one of the referees who has refereed previously, Alejandro Galvez, slightly sniffily, probably, points this out, that they've cost the División de Honor around 1,300,000 pesos in a year. Okay, so that gives you an idea the type of money that Chile is prepared to spend in order to deal with the different types of problems they're having. Because there have been lots of incidents of violence on the pitch, violence in the stands, lots of complaints from the different clubs. And these are the problems that the British referees are designed to solve. This is what they're being brought to do. And it's worth pointing out, it's not just on the pitch. Supposedly, their behaviour would also teach the fans how to behave as well. And a lot of the editorials in these newspapers and sporting magazines are talking about these kind of issues of fair play, of learning the game from the masters, teaching us the famous British spirit, fair play, chivalry, gentlemanliness. That is still a part of every Saturday afternoon's crowd towards the referees to the very present day. Yeah. What is interesting as well, which is different to Argentina, is that we haven't yet found any evidence of the refereeing union complaints about this situation. There were complaints from Argentinian referees when British referees first went there. A lot of the referees and linesmen refused to referee with them in the first few weeks, so they had to kind of come to an agreement of how this was going to be managed. In Chile at the time, only 1 or 2 of the referees are refereeing on a week. Normally you have 5 games a week, but there are some games where no Chilean referees are refereeing at all. Sergio Bustamante is one of the ones who does, but it's interesting to note that he actually leaves Chile to go to Colombia to referee in the El Dorado League, which I've spoken about before. So actually, it's not just British referees that are coming to South America. There is also a little bit of transnational, global, continental transfers of referees in South America as well. So the first impressions are very good, as you might expect. I've kind of picked out a few bits in red just to translate. So the competence of the English referees who are working on our pitches cannot be argued. Okay, and again, some of the main things that are being dealt with are things like not allowing them to argue, getting things on and off the pitch as quickly as possible. The players, for their part, have known how to behave in these first fixtures and have not argued the decisions. So we have this idea of initial respect, because everything they've been told is that these are the masters of the games. There is such a degree of respect for Britain, for England particularly, and it's not just in football, it's also in politics. This is seen as being the way to behave. And this ties in with this idea of kind of modernity, that somehow Europe must be respected, they know how to do things, so we should follow suit. And we have these kinds of excitement in the newspapers. Again, I'll just kind of translate bits and pieces. This one is the first time that they're actually performing, the 10th of July 1950. Today, the British referees are acting for the first time. Then we have some more specific match reports. Mr. Walter Manning, how impeccable was his refereeing? And then just kind of carry on with starting the game off. And William Crawford, he sanctioned things with justice, and he only blew up when there was any kind of example of rough play. This is kind of what we see for the first month. They're pretty much getting either perfect. One of the magazines, one of the newspapers is kind of rating them out of 7. Almost all of them are getting 7 or 6. Bustamante and Vicuña are getting 3s and 4s. Okay, so that's kind of what's being seen on the pitch to start with. And there's a lot of scrutiny of them. Pretty much in every game, there is a picture of the referee in action. So here we have William Crawford, checking out what's going on. There is a lot of talk about their positioning, about how close they are to the game, how they're kind of knowing how to communicate with the players in terms of just with their whistle, not allowing anything else. Their character is always highlighted. Their spirit of gentlemanliness, again, is repeated on lots of occasions. And again, they're always put in charge of the biggest games. So the games that are the clásicos, the derbies, between La Universidad de Chile and Colo-Colo against Magallanes, and some of the kind of more, what are called the Colonia derbies between Audax Italiano and Unión Española. It is always these referees that are doing the job. Okay, they are always there to do the big ones. Again, this one's quite a nice one. Colo-Colo Magallanes, a kind of certificate degree grade exam for Mr. Crawford. Okay, so they were kind of checking them out to see how good they were very constantly. What is picked out, though, by the newspapers is that they're kind of saying, what's really interesting is that these are referees that are competent and impartial because they have no stake in the play, and a lot of the problems was that they thought that referees might have a link with Colo-Colo, with Universidad Católica, and would be given decisions to favour the bigger teams. This is one of the reasons why they were appointed, because they were impartial. But what they do pick out is that because of the level of respect is shown, there is a massive difference between that and the Chilean referees. And they say, why is it that we can't give the same respect to the Chilean referees? Because if they did, we wouldn't have this problem. So they're starting to kind of self-examine a little bit about what is going on with the way that Chilean directors are playing in terms of the clubs, because the directors are the ones that are rating the referees, in terms of the fans, and obviously the players themselves. They just see a totally different treatment, which is going on. Okay, so a little bit more of this close scrutiny. I just love these pictures. It gives an idea of how close the sporting photographers are getting. One of the things that actually did happen was some of the referees got very angry with these photographers because they'd be coming onto the pitch quite a lot of the time and trying to take pictures, of goals. And there's quite often you can see photographers on the pitch. I just love these two. Again, it's Crawford in action. Again, not the Flying Scotsman in this case, the jumping one. There's one where he's just jumping to see the action here. This one, he's jumping to avoid a shot that's just been taken, probably getting a little bit too close to the action. The ball does go in. There is a complaint from the team that concedes that goal, saying that the goalkeeper was unsighted. But you can just get the idea of what's going with the sporting press in the 1950s in Chile as well, in terms of the action that they're trying to capture. The other aspect that happens straight away is a lot of humour. Okay. Again, here are a couple of them. This one in the middle, we'll start with. We've got Crawford saying, "I'm not Catholic, I'm Protestant." The hilarious joke that's going on there is that there is a team in Chile called Universidad Católica. This is the rival team, La U, which is the other university team, Chile. And the joke is that he's saying, "You must be Catholic." "No, I'm Protestant." It's hilarious. Sorry, only go. Again, we have these ones, again, being picked out that there are no protests because as soon as they make a mistake, they're all saying, "Oh no, it must be a new rule." These are rules that they know that we don't. As sad South Americans, we don't know these rules. So that's kind of another example. This one comes from another story that Crawford, again, apparently went into one changing room before the game to ask for a massage because that was what the physiotherapist would do. He asked for one leg to be refereed by one team's physiotherapist and then goes into the other changing room and has the other leg massaged by the other team's physiotherapist. So this kind of idea of fair play, equality for both sides is the stories that are going on. A few more examples here. Again, we have this idea of the diving South American footballer. Again, you can't quite see the caption, but what it's basically saying is, "Get up, man. Don't make a theatre of it. We're not in the municipal theatre." So here we have this going back to the idea that South American footballers were diving and cheating in the eyes of British refs way back in the 1950s. Okay? Again, probably nothing has changed. This was a lovely story about that apparently a player called Prieto had actually managed to steal, that one's Manning, had stolen Manning's pencil, so he couldn't get booked. So there was this kind of joke about Manning looking all over for his pencil where Prieto had kind of nabbed it. This was a kind of a joke about actually the fact when they started to realise that the referees were actually quite old and struggling to keep up with the game, we have this. It doesn't matter that you're old as long as you're the best one. So this is a kind of critique of some of the refs that we're coming across. And this one is again a kind of Scottish joke. "Now we know why Mr. Crawford doesn't like to blow his whistle much. He doesn't want to waste his breath. He's Scottish." So again, even they know the jokes about Scottish people. As always, kind of familiarity starts to breed contempt. And we do start to get the first kind of criticisms of the referees, a start realisation that they might not be as perfect as they might do. There is also this idea that somehow they're judging them on different standards. This particular article from November 1950, about 4 months after they'd arrived, shows that Las Heras, one of the Chilean referees in action, had actually got a better game than in this case, McKenna, but hadn't been criticised to the same extent. And there's a starting realisation that what's actually happening is that they're giving the same types of performances, but just because they're British, they're being thought to be doing better. Okay? Again, we do see the caring side of McKenna. He hasn't just knocked him out, just looking after one of the players in that particular instance. These are 1951, their second season, is where we actually do start to see a lot of criticisms. These are all instances in the first few weeks about problems that the different referees are having. They're being criticised for decisions, for allowing too rough play, and this is a very common critique of the British refs, that they let a lot more go. The shoulder charge, the barge, as long as you are going without intent to injure, that is okay. And that's the difference of the British refs in terms of their interpretation. The Chilean refs basically will blow up for a lot more. Okay, so any form of kind of charging, any form of rough play is seen as having intent. Okay, so that often tends to be the problem. What you then have, for the first time in articles like this one, we censure McKenna, is that they are asked, that some of the clubs saying, we do not want to be refereed by these referees now. It tends to come after a very controversial game, but this is the power that the club directors have, where they say, we refuse to have McKenna, we refuse to have Crawford because of this decision. Okay, so that starts to be a problem. It's largely ignored by the División de Honor, but what we do see is that the clubs are starting to think that they're less impartial and are starting to be less respectful for the work of these British referees. And we start to get the major events. So I'm going to talk about 3 particular events that happen to different referees. The first one is an attack on Walter Manning. This happens in Valparaiso. He has just refereed a game between Wanderers, which is the Valparaiso team, and Iberia, which is quite a lowly, not very successful Santiago club. Iberia have won the game. At the end of the game, Manning leaves the ground in the car of a director of the Everton club, not the Everton here, but Everton of Viña del Mar, which are the big rivals of Valparaiso, of the Wanderers team. So he's going off to the station with this director of the Everton club, gets to the station to head back to Santiago, and he's attacked by the director of the Wanderers club, a guy called Señor Arsenio Fernandez, and his son, who kind of give him a bit of a kicking before the director of the Everton club kind of manages to get rid of them. But this happens in plain sight, and this becomes a national scandal. So this is on the front page of, not in the sporting magazines, but also the Valparaiso press and some of the Santiago press. What happens is that the director of the club is only banned for a year. And Walter Manning gives an interview where he said, I thought he would be kicked out of football for good. So there is a clear problem and a clear kind of power struggle going on in the Chilean game. Remember, the directors are part of the kind of División de Honor organisation. What also happens in this particular case is that Arsenio Fernandez gives money to the Journalists Association, which kind of governs the type of press that he will start to receive. So even at this time, we see directors trying to interfere in the way things are being managed. But this is the kind of first major example of the types of violences that a lot of the Chilean referees had been receiving, but actually starts impacting on British referees as well. There is a lot of fear in Chile, by the way, because Manning will report this to Stanley Rouse. And there is a worry that Chile will obviously get a negative reaction for the way their game is being played, by the way that their league is happening. There's an idea that this will be a diplomatic incident. McKenna has a very bad afternoon when he is at Everton. He is in Viña del Mar. Here we see him, just on the ground here, having been knocked out, but someone's thrown a bottle at him in the crowd. Okay, that's the first bit. The game does carry on. He manages to get up, the game finishes. However, when he is getting the train from Yai station, a fan will come and hit him again. So he doesn't just get bottled on the afternoon, he gets punched as well by a fan at one of the train stations. So not an ideal one. Yeah, that's kind of on that one. McKenna also has another scandal in the following year, 1952. Here we see him in the middle. What tends to happen in a lot of these games is that once something happens, everyone will come on the pitch. Photographers, kids, the military in this case. What has happened here is that he has sent off the Chilean captain, a guy called Arturo Farias. Farias refuses to get sent off. There is a general commotion for about 15 minutes. Eventually, McKenna walks off the pitch. He comes back 15 minutes later. Farias is still there, has still not left the pitch. So he then calls off the game entirely. But again, we have this general example of, what kind of problems that are going on, the lack of respect for referees, the ways in which we see everyone and their dog coming out to see what's going on. But again, it gives the idea that after a couple of years, this idea of the untouchable British referees has definitely gone by now. And this again will prompt general national thinking. What is going on with our game? They see that there is a sickness not just with the way the referees is going, but actually it's the directors, it's the fans, it's the league that are being blamed. So we get a period of national introspection which criticises the way in which things are going on. And what this tells us as well is that there is a kind of middle ground between the old amateur fair play ethos from about 15, 20 years ago that hasn't really dissipated. This idea that football should be educating, should produce good men, chivalrous, fair play, all this kind of thing. But essentially they see it as becoming a failed experiment. We are close to losing what has been achieved. We have achieved an incalculable gain with bringing the referees over, and we know that the matches will end now. So again, imagine that before they came, there was a regular problem of matches ending with fights having to be called off too early. So that's what's been solved apparently. But again, what they achieved had seemed impossible. The respect of crowds and players, that counts a lot. And again, this justifies the spending. But that kind of level of respect is clearly dissipating. I'm not going to go through this one particularly because I think we're running out of time. But again, there is just the example of how referees can spend time chatting in cafes, can talk to referees, but all this kind of thing is being lost due to this new kind of wave of violence that is starting again. And they're even starting to talk about the newspapers. Maybe we should just get them for a year, then we get someone else for another year, or maybe what we should have is we should have referees from Argentina. They referee in our league for a bit. We send our referees to Argentina. Someone else goes to Uruguay, and actually we have this kind of turntable of referees. That's kind of becoming a debate about how to solve this problem. Eventually, the referees will depart, and again, what we do see is a lot of fondness to all of them. Manning, Crawford and McKenna will write short pieces. They will all appear in the newspapers about saying goodbye. Again, McKenna, despite being attacked by bottles, despite sending off the Chilean national team captain, was applauded him with a lot of affection. Again, I'm not sure you'd get that nowadays. It was the last game of the little Gringuito, and again, Gringo is always the way that they're called. Okay, this idea of the Gringo. And then he went off to Lima to go and send off Peruvian players and get beaten up by Jaume Santos as well. He was such a good referee, that Gringo, and such a good guy and so nice. And then someone in the crowd was saying, you see, it's the same as always, there is no bad dead person. Okay. So the postscript. What we then have in the following season is all of the problems returning. The problems have not been solved. The play of the fans, the behaviour of the fans, the behaviour of the players, the behaviour of the directors is still a problem. So when William Crawford goes, this absence has coincided with the increase in rough play on the fields of play. The British whistlers made mistakes. They were far from being perfect, but they at least could say what the difference was between bad intent and forcefulness. And again, the players' view. Hernan Fernandez, the goalkeeper Santiago Morning, it's not been a good championship. I think various issues have influenced this in different ways. One of them is bad refereeing. So again, as soon as they've gone, the problems all come back. Right, that's it from us. Hope that's just given you a bit of an insight about why people are going across, what kind of things are being talked about, who's going across, and what kind of incidents they suffered in their time in Chile and Argentina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Alex. Brilliant stuff. Referees, people coming over here taking our jobs, eh? Fantastic. Our next talk is on the 15th of March. It's Mick Kennedy talking about British cycling. Mick's probably not the best bloke to talk about cycling, and he just fell off his bike and broke his pelvis. But anyway, I love it's a practical demonstration. So we'll look forward to seeing Mick. Thanks once again, Pete. Pete, Alex, thank you.
No worries. Cheers. That was all right. No, don't be silly. No. You were doing all the kind of setting the scene, so I got the chance to do the fun stuff. So.
El refovoise à Gringo, he come from Inglaterra. Gringo, Gringo, Gringo. El refovoise à Gringo, he come from Inglaterra.